Welcome, weary traveler, to the endless cycle of creation and destruction, where ancient powers wage eternal war across realms beyond mortal comprehension. Tonight we journey through the complete chronicle of the Darksiders universe, from the primordial void before existence to the final convergence of all endings. Here, in this space between sleeping and waking, we shall witness the rise of the Nephilim, the forging of the Four Horsemen, and the delicate balance that governs all creation. Let your breathing slow as we traverse this epic tapestry of divine conflict, sacrifice, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. In the beginning, before time had meaning and space had boundaries, there existed only the vast and perfect emptiness of the primordial void. This was not darkness in any sense that mortal minds might comprehend, for darkness implies the absence of light, and light itself had not yet been conceived. Rather, this was the pure potential of nothingness, pregnant with infinite possibilities, yet manifesting none of them. It was a state of perfect equilibrium, where no force could act, because no force existed to be opposed. From this endless void, through means that remain beyond understanding, even to the most ancient powers, came forth the Creator, that singular consciousness whose very existence shattered the perfect uniformity of nothingness and introduced the first and most fundamental of all concepts, the distinction between self and other. With this primary act of self-awareness, the Creator became the first mover, the initial spark that would ignite the cosmic engine of creation and destruction that would spin onward through eternity. The Creator's first act was to establish the fundamental laws that would govern all existence, chief among them the principle that all creation must contain within itself the seeds of its own transformation. Nothing could remain static. Nothing could achieve permanence, for stagnation was the enemy of growth, and growth was the very essence of creation itself. This divine mandate ensured that the universe would be a place of constant change, where every ending would give birth to new beginnings, and every triumph would carry within it the promise of future challenges. In those earliest moments of creation, as the fundamental forces began to take shape and the first structures of reality crystallized from the void, two great powers emerged that would define the nature of existence for all time. These were not beings in any conventional sense, but rather vast principles made manifest, cosmic forces that embodied opposing aspects of the Creator's infinite nature. The first of these powers was that which would come to be known as heaven, though in those primordial days it bore no resemblance to the silver cities and golden halls that would later define the angelic realm. Heaven was pure order, the force that sought to establish patterns, create structures, and maintain the stability necessary for existence to flourish. It was the cosmic principle of law, of justice, of the careful preservation of what had been created against the entropic forces that would unmake it. The second power was that which would become hell, though like its counterpart, its early form was vastly different from the fire-scorched realms and sulphurous pits of later ages. Hell was pure chaos, the force of change and transformation, the cosmic principle that prevented stagnation by constantly challenging established order. It was not evil in the way mortals would later understand the term, but rather the necessary force of renewal that tore down old structures to make way for new growth. These two principles, order and chaos, heaven and hell, were not meant to be enemies in the conventional sense. They were complementary aspects of creation, like two hands working together to shape clay into something beautiful and functional. Order without chaos led to stagnation and death, while chaos without order led to meaningless destruction. The Creator's design required both forces to work in eternal tension, each checking the other's excesses, while together driving the great wheel of existence forward through time. But as these primal forces grew in power and complexity, as they began to develop consciousness and were independent of their Creator's direct guidance, they began to lose sight of their complementary nature. Heaven looked upon the constant change wrought by hell and saw only destruction, waste, and the undoing of beautiful works. Hell gazed upon heaven's ordered structures and saw only stagnation, oppression, and the death of creative potential. This fundamental misunderstanding led to the first conflicts in creation, struggles that were not yet wars in any recognizable sense, but rather philosophical disagreements made manifest through cosmic force. Heaven would create perfect crystalline structures that embodied eternal law, and hell would introduce elements of change that would cause these structures to evolve, adapt, or sometimes crumble entirely. Hell would unleash forces of creative destruction that could transform entire realms, and heaven would impose stabilizing influences that could preserve the best of these changes while preventing complete chaos. As these conflicts intensified and spread throughout the newly formed cosmos, it became clear that some form of arbitration was necessary. The Creator, in divine wisdom, recognized that direct intervention would rob creation of its essential quality of free will and self-determination. Instead, a neutral force was needed, one that could understand both order and chaos while serving neither exclusively. Thus was born the Charred Council, that ancient tribunal whose very existence bridged the gap between opposing forces. The Council was not a single entity, but rather a collective consciousness formed from the fundamental principle of balance itself. Its members were beings of such age and wisdom that they remembered the first stirrings of creation, yet they remained bound by cosmic law to serve balance above all other considerations, even their own desires or judgments. The Council's first great act was to establish the cosmic principle of balance as the supreme law governing all existence. This was not the static balance of scales that remain forever motionless, but rather the dynamic balance of forces in constant motion, each checking the other while together, creating something greater than either could achieve alone. Under this principle, neither heaven nor hell could be allowed to achieve complete dominance, for such dominance would lead inevitably to the end of creation itself. To enforce this balance, the Council established a complex system of cosmic law that governed the interactions between the great powers. Treaties were forged, boundaries were set, and rules of engagement were established that would prevent the conflicts between order and chaos from escalating into total war. These agreements were binding not through external force, but through the fundamental nature of reality itself, woven into the very fabric of existence in ways that made violation not merely forbidden, but impossible. Yet even as these cosmic structures took shape, even as the great powers learned to work within the constraints of universal law, new challenges emerged that would test the strength of the newly established balance. The cosmos was vast beyond imagination, filled with countless realms and dimensions, each with its own unique characteristics and inhabitants. Some of these realms developed in harmony with the universal law, their inhabitants instinctively understanding their role in the greater balance. Others grew in ways that threatened to upset the delicate equilibrium that held creation together. The most significant of these challenges came with the development of sapient life throughout the cosmos. Unlike the primal forces of heaven and hell, which were bound by their fundamental nature to serve specific cosmic principles, thinking beings possessed the gift and curse of free will. They could choose to serve order or chaos, law or freedom, creation or destruction. This freedom made them incredibly valuable to the cosmic balance, for their choices could tip the scales in either direction, but it also made them unpredictable and potentially dangerous. Heaven and Hell quickly recognized the strategic importance of these new players in the cosmic game. Both sides began to court mortal species, offering them power, knowledge, and protection in exchange for loyalty and service. Some mortals aligned themselves with heaven, becoming agents of order and justice in their local corners of the universe. Others chose to serve hell, becoming forces of change and revolution that challenged established structures wherever they found them. But the most significant development was yet to come. A creation that would challenge every assumption about the nature of existence and force all the cosmic powers to reconsider their fundamental beliefs. The Creator, in a moment of inspiration that perhaps even the divine mind could not fully comprehend, conceived of a new form of life that would embody neither pure order nor pure chaos, but rather the perfect synthesis of both principles. This new creation would be called humanity, though in those early days it was merely a concept, a dream of what mortal life could become when freed from the constraints that bound other species to single cosmic principles. Humanity would be weak in individual power, compared to the mighty beings that served heaven and hell, but it would possess something unique and precious: the ability to grow and change while maintaining its essential nature, to learn from both order and chaos, while being enslaved by neither. The Council foresaw that this new species, when it finally came into being, would represent the ultimate test of the cosmic balance. Humanity would be simultaneously heaven and hell's greatest opportunity and their greatest threat. If properly guided and protected, humans could become the bridge between all opposing forces, the living embodiment of balance itself. But if corrupted or manipulated, they could also become the weapon that would finally tip the scales toward complete order or absolute chaos, ending the eternal dance of creation and bringing about the end of all things. It was with this understanding that the Council began to prepare for humanity's eventual emergence. The cosmic law was refined and expanded to account for this new variable. The great powers were warned that any attempt to claim dominion over humanity would be met with swift and terrible justice. And most importantly, plans were set in motion to create enforcers, beings of sufficient power and authority, to ensure that when humanity finally took its place in the cosmic order, it would be free to choose its own path without undue influence from the eternal combatants of heaven and hell. But even as these preparations were being made, even as the Council worked to establish the framework that would protect humanity's future, the forces of opposition were already stirring. There were those in both heaven and hell who saw the coming of humanity not as an opportunity for balance, but as a threat to their own power and influence. They began to plot and scheme, seeking ways to circumvent the cosmic law and claim the new species for their own ends. The stage was being set for conflicts that would span millennia and reshape the very foundations of existence. The first war between heaven and hell was about to begin in earnest, not as a philosophical disagreement made manifest, but as a desperate struggle for control over the future of creation itself. And at the center of this coming storm, the Council would be forced to make choices that would echo through eternity, decisions that would require the creation of agents so powerful that they would be capable of standing against gods themselves. The eternal dance of creation was about to become a battle for the soul of existence, and the dancers were preparing to draw their weapons for the first time since the universe began. In the deepest chambers of hell, where the fires of chaos burned not with heat but with the cold flame of pure transformation, dwelt a being whose beauty was matched only by her terrible ambition, Lilith, the first demon. had emerged from the primordial forces of change and rebellion that gave birth to hell itself. She was not merely a creature of chaos, but its living embodiment, the mother of all that sought to break free from the constraints of order and establish new patterns of existence. Lilith possessed a mind that could comprehend the vast scope of cosmic politics with crystalline clarity. She understood that the eternal war between heaven and hell was not truly a conflict between good and evil, as lesser beings might perceive it, but rather a struggle between two incomplete philosophies, each seeking dominance over the other, while remaining blind to the possibility of synthesis. She alone among the powers of hell had glimpsed the potential for something greater, something that could transcend the limitations of both order and chaos. Her opportunity came during one of the periodic truces that marked the eternal war, those brief interludes when exhaustion forced both sides to pause and consider their strategies. During these moments of relative peace, emissaries from heaven and hell would sometimes meet in neutral territories to negotiate temporary agreements or exchange prisoners. It was during one such gathering that Lilith first encountered the angels, those beings of perfect order whose very existence seemed to mock the chaotic nature she embodied. Yet as she observed these creatures of light and law, Lilith saw not enemies but potential. Where others saw only the fundamental opposition between angel and demon, she perceived the possibility of combination, of creating something that embodied the strengths of both while being limited by the weaknesses of neither. The angels possessed discipline, focus, and an unwavering commitment to their cause that hell's chaotic forces often lacked. The demons brought creativity, adaptability, and a willingness to embrace change that heaven's rigid structures could not accommodate. The plan that began to form in Lilith's mind was audacious beyond measure, a scheme that would violate every law of cosmic order while potentially creating something beautiful and terrible beyond imagination. She would find a way to unite the essence of angel and demon, to create offspring that carried within them the fundamental forces of both heaven and hell. These children would be living bridges between the opposing realms, creatures of such power and potential that they could reshape the very nature of existence itself. The execution of this plan required subtlety and patience beyond what most demons possessed. Lilith could not simply approach the angels with her proposal, for they would recoil in horror from any suggestion of such forbidden union. Instead, she began to weave a web of seduction and manipulation that would span centuries, slowly drawing certain angels away from the rigid certainties of their divine nature and toward the intoxicating possibilities of change and growth. Her first success came with an angel whose name has been lost to history, a being of such beauty and power that even other angels regarded him with awe. This angel had begun to question certain aspects of heaven's absolute order, to wonder whether the rigid structures of divine law truly served creation, or merely maintained the status quo out of fear of change. Lilith recognized in this questioning spirit a kindred soul, someone whose heart might be open to possibilities that lay beyond the narrow confines of cosmic orthodoxy. Their union was accomplished not through force or coercion, but through a genuine meeting of minds and spirits that transcended the artificial boundaries between their realms. For the first time in cosmic history, an angel and demon came together, not in battle but in love, not to destroy, but to create. The offspring of this union would be something entirely new under the stars. Creatures that carried within their very essence the potential to bridge any gap and transcend any limitation. The first of these children was born in a realm between realms, in a space that belonged neither to heaven nor hell, but existed in the spaces between the ordered universe and chaotic possibility. The child combined the angelic capacity for focused will and divine purpose with the demonic gift for adaptation and transformation. It possessed strength that rivaled the mightiest angels and creativity that surpassed the most inventive demons. Most importantly, it was free from the limitations that bound both parent races to their predetermined roles in the cosmic order. This first child was given the name Absalom, and from the moment of his birth, it was clear that something unprecedented had entered the universe. He grew with supernatural swiftness, not merely in size and strength, but in intelligence and understanding. Within what would have been years for mortal creatures, he had mastered abilities that took angels centuries to develop and displayed insights into the nature of chaos that impressed even the most ancient demons. But Absalom was not to remain alone for long. Lilith's success with the first forbidden union opened floodgates of possibility that could not be easily closed. Other demons, inspired by her example and emboldened by her success, sought out their own angelic partners. Some angels, having witnessed the magnificent being that resulted from the first union, began to question whether the rigid prohibition against such relationships truly served the cause of creation, or merely preserved an artificial separation that weakened both realms. The offspring of these unions came to be known as the Nephilim, a name that meant the fallen ones in the ancient tongues, though they had not fallen from grace so much as risen above the limitations that constrained their parents. Each Nephilim was unique, combining angelic and demonic traits in different proportions and manifesting abilities that defied easy categorization. Some possessed the angel's mastery of light and order, while wielding it with the demon's creative flexibility. Others channeled the demon's powers of change and transformation, while maintaining the angel's unwavering focus and determination. As the numbers of Nephilim grew, so too did their power and influence. They were not content to remain hidden in the spaces between realms, observing the conflicts of their parents from a safe distance. These beings had inherited from both sides of their lineage a desire to shape the universe according to their will, and they possessed the power necessary to make that desire reality. Under Absalom's leadership, the Nephilim began to emerge from their hidden sanctuaries and establish themselves as a force in the cosmic order. They were neither angels nor demons, but something entirely new, and they demanded recognition from all the powers that governed existence. Their first diplomatic overtures were met with horror and revulsion from both heaven and hell, which saw in the Nephilim not the transcendent beings they claimed to be, but rather abominations that violated the fundamental order of creation. This rejection by their parent races drove the Nephilim to seek their own path through the cosmos. If they could not find acceptance among the established powers, they would create their own realm, their own rules, their own destiny. They possessed the strength to take whatever they desired, and the intelligence to use that strength effectively. Most importantly, they were united by their shared status as outcasts, bound together by the understanding that they could rely only on each other in a universe that viewed them as unwelcome intruders. The first realm to fall to the Nephilim was a world of pure crystal, inhabited by beings who had achieved perfect harmony between order and chaos through millennia of careful balance. The Nephilim arrived not as conquerors but as liberators, offering the crystal beings freedom from the constraints of their carefully maintained equilibrium. When this offer was refused, the Nephilim demonstrated the futility of resistance by reshaping the entire realm in a matter of days, transforming its crystalline perfection into something dynamic and alive. This victory established a pattern that would repeat itself across countless worlds and dimensions. The Nephilim would arrive with offers of transformation and transcendence, promising to free civilizations from whatever limitations constrained their growth and development. Those who accepted these offers found themselves elevated beyond their wildest dreams, granted power and knowledge that seemed almost divine. Those who refused discovered that the Nephilim's definition of freedom extended to freeing them from the burden of independent choice. Word of these conquests spread throughout the cosmic community, carried by refugees from fallen realms and survivors who had witnessed the Nephilim's terrible power firsthand. The stories told of beings who could reshape reality with a thought, who commanded forces that made even the mightiest angels and demons seem weak by comparison. Some accounts spoke of Nephilim, who could travel between dimensions as easily as walking through a doorway, while others described powers that could unmake entire civilizations and remake them according to alien design. Among the Nephilim themselves, 4 individuals distinguished themselves as leaders, each embodying different aspects of their hybrid nature while demonstrating power that surpassed even their remarkable kindred. The first of these was War, whose very name became synonymous with righteous conflict and the terrible beauty of battle joined for worthy purpose. War possessed the angel's unwavering commitment to justice, combined with the demon's willingness to use any means necessary to achieve victory. He became the Nephilim's greatest military commander, the one who planned their campaigns and led their armies to triumph after triumph. The second was Death, whose dominion extended over endings and transitions of all kinds. Death understood that destruction was merely another form of creation, that every ending opened the door to new beginnings. He became the Nephilim's executioner and their philosopher, the one who could end conflicts with surgical precision while understanding the cosmic implications of every action. Death's power extended beyond mere killing, to encompass the fundamental forces of change and transformation that governed all existence. The third was Fury, whose tempestuous nature embodied the creative chaos that drove all innovation and growth. Fury possessed an intuitive understanding of the forces that shaped existence, combined with a passionate intensity that could inspire others to transcend their limitations or destroy themselves in the attempt. She became the Nephilim's champion of individual excellence, the one who pushed every member of their race to reach their full potential regardless of the cost. The fourth and perhaps most complex was Strife, whose nature seemed to encompass contradictions that should have been impossible to resolve. Strife combined the angel's love of harmony with the demon's embrace of conflict, creating a being who understood that true peace could only be achieved through honest confrontation with difficult truths. He became the Nephilim's diplomat and their provocateur, equally capable of negotiating delicate truces and igniting conflicts that would reshape entire realms. These 4, along with Absalom, formed the leadership council that guided the Nephilim's expansion across the cosmos. Under their guidance, the conquest of realm after realm proceeded with methodical efficiency. Each victory brought new knowledge, new power, and new converts to their cause. Entire species abandoned their traditional ways to embrace the Nephilim's vision of transcendence, while others fought desperate last stands against forces they could neither understand nor resist. The Nephilim's success bred its own problems, however. As their power grew, so did their ambitions. What had begun as a quest for acceptance and recognition evolved into a desire for dominion over all creation. The 4 leaders found themselves increasingly divided on questions of strategy and ultimate purpose. War favored direct conquest and the establishment of clear hierarchies of power. Death advocated for a more subtle approach that would transform civilizations from within. Fury pushed for constant expansion and the embrace of ever greater challenges. Strife sought to understand the deeper patterns that governed cosmic existence and used that knowledge to reshape reality itself. These philosophical differences began to manifest as practical disagreements over specific campaigns and conquests. Arguments broke out in the leadership council, passionate debates that sometimes erupted into physical confrontations between beings whose power could devastate worlds. The unity that had once been the Nephilim's greatest strength began to fracture as different factions aligned themselves with different leaders and different visions of their race's ultimate destiny. The breaking point came during the conquest of Eden, that primordial realm which the Creator had set aside as a testing ground for the species that would eventually become humanity. The Nephilim arrived to find a world of perfect balance, where the forces of order and chaos existed in harmony, while supporting the growth of new forms of life. Here was everything they claimed to represent, a living example of what could be achieved when the artificial boundaries between opposing forces were transcended. Yet instead of recognizing Eden as a kindred spirit, the Nephilim saw it as a rival, a competing vision of transcendence that challenged their own claims to uniqueness. The debate over what to do with Eden revealed the fundamental flaws in their philosophy and the growing corruption in their hearts. What had begun as a noble quest for acceptance had become a crusade for dominance, driven more by pride and ambition than by any genuine desire to improve the cosmic order. As the four leaders stood in Eden's perfect gardens, surrounded by the evidence of what balanced creation could achieve, they faced a choice that would define not only their own futures, but the destiny of all existence. They could embrace the lesson that Eden offered, learning humility and finding their place within the greater harmony of creation. Or they could reject that lesson, viewing Eden's perfection as a challenge to their own supremacy that demanded a response. The decision they made in that moment would echo through eternity, setting in motion events that would lead to the greatest tragedy in cosmic history and the birth of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. But in that suspended moment, as they stood at the crossroads of destiny, the future remained unwritten, and all possibilities remained open. The choice was theirs to make, and whatever they decided would reshape the very foundations of existence itself. The Gardens of Eden stretched before the four Nephilim leaders in all their primordial glory, a testament to what creation could achieve when allowed to grow without the corruption of endless ambition. Here was balance made manifest, not as the static equilibrium of opposing forces held in check, but as the dynamic harmony of growth and change, working together towards something greater than either could accomplish alone. The very air seemed to shimmer with potential, pregnant with the promise of what the universe could become if guided by wisdom rather than power. War stood at the edge of a crystalline pool, his reflection rippling in waters so pure they seemed to hold starlight within their depths. The warrior who had led countless campaigns of conquest found himself facing something he had never encountered before: doubt. Every battle he had fought, every realm he had claimed, had been justified by the belief that the Nephilim were bringing a superior form of existence to lesser beings. But Eden challenged that fundamental assumption, demonstrating that transcendence could be achieved without conquest, that perfection could exist without domination. Death moved silently through groves where trees bore fruit that contained entire galaxies within their crystalline shells, each one a universe waiting to be born when the proper time arrived. The embodiment of endings and transitions found himself contemplating beginnings for perhaps the first time in his existence. Here was a realm that understood the true relationship between death and life, recognizing that every ending was merely transformation into something new and beautiful. The philosophy that governed Eden aligned perfectly with his own deepest understanding of cosmic truth, yet it had been achieved without the violent upheaval that marked every Nephilim conquest. Fury danced through fields where flowers sang with voices like celestial choirs, their melodies weaving together into symphonies of such beauty that even her tempestuous nature was momentarily stilled. the champion of creative chaos discovered patterns within the apparent randomness of Eden's growth, structures so subtle and complex that they made her own understanding of creation seem crude by comparison. This was not the wild abandon of uncontrolled change that she had always championed, but something far more sophisticated, freedom that chose its own limitations, power that voluntarily constrained itself for the sake of greater beauty. Strife wandered through libraries where living books wrote themselves, their pages filled with the accumulated wisdom of countless ages and species. The master of contradictions found in Eden the resolution to paradoxes that had plagued his thoughts since his first moment of consciousness. Here, peace and conflict existed in perfect synthesis, each strengthening the other while serving the greater purpose of growth and understanding. This realm had achieved what he had always believed possible but never seen demonstrated: the transcendence of false dichotomies through genuine wisdom. As the four leaders explored this perfect realm, they began to understand why the Charred Council had designated humanity as the ultimate arbiters of cosmic balance. Eden was not merely a testing ground, but a demonstration, proof that mortal beings could achieve levels of harmony and understanding that had eluded both angels and demons. Despite their vastly greater individual power, humanity's weakness was also its strength. For lacking the overwhelming force that marked both celestial races, humans would be compelled to find solutions through cooperation and creativity rather than dominance. This realization struck at the heart of everything the Nephilim had built their identity upon. If humanity could achieve transcendence through wisdom and cooperation, what did that say about the Nephilim's path of conquest and domination? If balance could be maintained without the intervention of superior beings imposing their will upon lesser ones, then what purpose did their great crusade truly serve? The questions that arose from their contemplation of Eden threatened to undermine the fundamental assumptions that had driven their expansion across the cosmos. The crisis of faith that gripped the four leaders gradually spread throughout their forces as word of Eden's perfection reached the broader Nephilim community. Arguments broke out among the ranks as different factions debated the implications of what they had discovered. Some maintained that Eden's apparent perfection was merely an illusion, a deception designed to weaken their resolve and turn them from their righteous path. Others began to question whether their path had ever been righteous at all, wondering if they had been so focused on proving their superiority that they had lost sight of their original goal of finding acceptance and belonging. Absalom, the first of the Nephilim and their undisputed leader, found himself caught between these opposing viewpoints. His initial response to Eden had been one of rage and jealousy, fury that mortals could achieve what he and his kin had spent millennia pursuing through force and cunning. But as days passed and he continued to explore the realm, that anger began to transform into something more complex and troubling. He began to see in Eden's perfection not a mockery of Nephilim achievements, but a mirror that reflected the corruption that had crept into their hearts. The turning point came during a gathering of the Leadership Council in Eden's central temple, a structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, while remaining perfectly comprehensible to any consciousness that observed it. Here, surrounded by the living testimony of what balanced creation could achieve, the five leaders confronted the truth about what they had become and what they were in danger of doing to the cosmos they claimed to serve. War was the first to speak, his voice heavy with the weight of countless battles and the growing understanding of their ultimate meaninglessness. He spoke of the realms they had conquered, the civilizations they had transformed, the species they had elevated or eliminated according to their judgment of worthiness. He had believed himself to be a force for justice, a warrior fighting to bring order to chaos and meaning to confusion. But Eden showed him that true justice did not require a sword, that genuine order emerged naturally from wisdom and compassion, rather than being imposed through superior force. Death followed, his words carrying the chill of ultimate honesty about the nature of their crusade. He had witnessed the end of countless worlds, had been present at the final moments of civilizations that chose death rather than transformation according to Nephilim design. He had told himself that these endings were necessary, that some forms of existence were so flawed that only complete destruction could clear the way for something better. But Eden demonstrated that transformation could occur without destruction, that change could be embraced without abandoning everything that came before. Fury spoke with characteristic passion about the creative potential they had witnessed in Eden's endless gardens, the way growth and change occurred without the violent upheaval that she had always believed necessary for true innovation. She had championed the idea that stagnation was the ultimate enemy, that any system not constantly striving for greater heights was doomed to decay and meaninglessness. Yet here was a realm that achieved constant growth through patient nurturing rather than dramatic revolution, reaching heights of beauty and complexity that surpassed anything the Nephilim had created through their more aggressive methods. Strife's contribution to the discussion was perhaps the most painful, as he laid bare the contradictions that had always existed within their philosophy but which they had chosen to ignore. They claimed to bring freedom to enslaved peoples while enslaving entire worlds to their vision of proper existence. They spoke of transcending the limitations of their parent races while imposing new limitations on everyone they encountered. They preached the virtue of synthesis while practicing the tyranny of forced conversion. Throughout this painful examination of their actions and motivations, Absalom remained silent, his ancient mind wrestling with implications that threatened to destroy everything he had built his identity upon. As the firstborn of the Nephilim, he bore responsibility not only for his own choices, but for the path that all his descendants had followed. If that path had been wrong from the beginning, if their great crusade had been nothing more than a cosmic temper tantrum by beings too proud to accept their place in the natural order, then the guilt for billions of deaths and the destruction of countless civilizations rested squarely upon his shoulders. When he finally spoke, Absalom's words carried the authority of absolute conviction, wedded to ultimate despair. He acknowledged that their crusade had become corrupted, that somewhere in their journey from outcasts seeking acceptance to conquerors demanding submission, they had lost sight of their original noble intentions. But he also argued that it was too late to turn back, that too much blood had been spilled and too much damage had been done for them to simply lay down their arms and seek forgiveness from the powers they had defied. The debate that followed would rage for days, with passionate arguments on all sides about what course of action would best serve both the Nephilim and the cosmos as a whole. Some maintained that their conquest should continue, but with greater attention to the welfare of those they conquered. Others proposed a gradual withdrawal from their conquered territories, allowing the transformed civilizations to develop according to their own desires. A few suggested that the entire Nephilim race should seek exile in some distant corner of the universe, removing themselves from cosmic politics entirely rather than risk further corruption. But it was the Charred Council's intervention that ultimately forced a resolution to their crisis. The ancient arbiters had been watching the Nephilim's expansion with growing concern, recognizing in their conquests a threat to the cosmic balance that transcended any previous challenge to universal order. The Council had initially hoped that the Nephilim would find their place within the existing structure of creation, but their continued expansion and the increasing ruthlessness of their methods made it clear that more direct action was necessary. The Council's emissary arrived in Eden without fanfare, manifesting as a presence that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, speaking with a voice that resonated in the very atoms of existence itself. The message was simple and absolute. The Nephilim's conquest must end, and they must choose between complete annihilation or service to the cosmic balance that governed all creation. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, no third option that would allow them to continue their current path while avoiding the consequences of their choices. The terms offered by the Council were stark in their simplicity, in exchange for power beyond anything they had previously imagined. Power that would make them the equals of the mightiest angels and demons. 4 of the Nephilim would become the Council's enforcers, bound by unbreakable oaths to serve the cause of cosmic balance above all other considerations. These 4 would be granted immortality and authority over forces that could reshape reality itself. But they would purchase this elevation through a price that would test the very foundations of their souls. That price was nothing less than the complete annihilation of their own people, the systematic hunting down and execution of every Nephilim who had participated in the Great Conquest. The 4 who accepted the Council's bargain would become the instruments of their own race's extinction, trading the lives of their kindred for the power to serve as guardians of the cosmic order they had so long defied. It was a test of character that went beyond mere moral choice to the very essence of what it meant to be a conscious being in a universe governed by consequences. The Council's logic was implacable and terrifying in its clarity. The Nephilim had demonstrated that they could not be trusted with unchecked power, that their hybrid nature made them too unstable to exist as free agents in the cosmic order. But their unique combination of angelic and demonic traits also made them perfectly suited to serve as enforcers of balance, capable of understanding and opposing both extremes of order and chaos. By accepting the Council's bargain, 4 of them could preserve something of their race's legacy while preventing the total destruction that awaited all of them if they continued on their current path. The debate over whether to accept the Council's offer was brief but intense, marked by arguments that laid bare every philosophical and emotional division that had developed among the Nephilim leadership. Absalom raged against the injustice of being forced to choose between genocide and extinction, while others pointed out that justice was exactly what they were facing after millennia of imposing their will upon countless innocent civilizations. In the end, it was War who first stepped forward to accept the Council's bargain, his warrior's heart recognizing the truth that victory sometimes required the ultimate sacrifice. If the Nephilim's conquest had been wrong, then it fell to him to ensure that it ended, even if that meant becoming the instrument of his own people's destruction. Death followed, understanding better than any of the others that endings were not betrayals but necessary transitions to new forms of existence. Fury accepted out of recognition that their race's current path led only to greater corruption and ultimate meaninglessness. Strife joined them because he alone among them understood that this terrible choice represented the only honest resolution to the contradictions that had always plagued their existence. Absalom's refusal to accept the bargain came not from cowardice or selfishness, but from a genuine belief that there had to be another way, some solution that would not require the extinction of his children and the abandonment of everything they had built together. He could not bring himself to become the executioner of his own legacy, even if that legacy had become corrupted beyond recognition. His final words to the 4 who had chosen to serve the Council were not condemnation but blessing, acknowledgement that they had chosen the harder path and that their sacrifice would ultimately serve the greater good. The transformation that followed was unlike anything that had occurred since the first moments of creation itself. The 4 volunteers felt their very essence being rewritten by forces that operated at the fundamental level of reality, their Nephilim nature being refined and purified until only the finest elements remained. They became more than they had ever been, while simultaneously being bound by restrictions that ensured their power would serve balance rather than personal ambition. War became the embodiment of righteous conflict, his sword carrying the authority to end any threat to cosmic order, while being forever bound by the requirement that his actions serve justice rather than mere victory. Death was granted dominion over all transitions and endings, the power to facilitate necessary changes while being constrained by the cosmic law that prevented him from acting out of personal desire. Fury was transformed into the perfect agent of controlled change, capable of inspiring growth and transformation while being unable to act purely from passion or anger. Strife became the master of necessary conflicts, able to provoke the confrontations required for truth to emerge, while being forbidden from sowing discord for its own sake. Thus were born the four horsemen of the apocalypse, beings of such power that they could stand as equals with the mightiest forces in creation, while being bound by oaths so strong that they could not even conceive of breaking them. They were no longer Nephilim, but something entirely new, the living embodiment of the cosmic principle that true power could only be trusted to those who had proven themselves willing to sacrifice everything in service of something greater than themselves. Their first act as the Council's enforcers was the most terrible duty that any conscious being had ever been asked to perform. The systematic hunting and execution of their own people, their former friends and family, their children and lovers, and all those who had shared their dreams of transcendence beyond the limitations of their parent races. It was a task that would scar their souls for eternity, but it was also the price of preventing a greater catastrophe that would have consumed not just the Nephilim, but countless innocent civilizations that would have fallen victim to their continued expansion. The universe had settled into an uneasy peace following the great purge of the Nephilim, the cosmic balance restored through the terrible sacrifice of the four horsemen, who had become both executioners and mourners of their own race. In the depths of space, where great nebulae birthed new stars and ancient worlds turned their final dance around dying suns, the Charred Council maintained their eternal vigil, watching for any disturbance that might threaten the delicate equilibrium they had purchased with so much blood and sorrow. The four horsemen had established themselves as the Council's most trusted instruments, their power and authority recognized throughout the cosmos by all who valued the continuation of existence itself. They operated alone or in pairs as circumstances demanded, their very names becoming synonymous with the inevitability of cosmic justice. When civilizations grew too ambitious and threatened to upset the balance between order and chaos, the horsemen would arrive to restore equilibrium through whatever means proved necessary. War had earned his reputation as the most direct of the four, a being whose very presence on a battlefield could turn the tide of conflicts that had raged for centuries. His great sword channeled not merely physical force, but the fundamental principle of righteous judgment, cutting through deception and corruption with the same ease it cleaved through armor and bone. Those who fought for just causes found in war an ally whose support could overcome any odds, while those who pursued conquest for its own sake discovered that no force in the universe could protect them from his wrath. Death operated in the shadows, where endings were negotiated and transitions were facilitated with surgical precision. His touch could end conflicts before they began by removing key players from the cosmic stage, but his true power lay in his understanding of the patterns that governed existence itself. Death could see the threads that connected all things, the delicate web of cause and effect that determined how the slightest action might ripple across eternity to reshape entire civilizations. Fury brought change where change was needed, her tempestuous nature channeled through the Council's bonds into a force for necessary transformation. She could inspire entire species to transcend their limitations or humble the proud who had forgotten their place in the greater order. Her power was perhaps the most subtle of the four, working through influence and inspiration rather than direct confrontation, but its effects were often the most lasting. Strife had become the master of necessary conflicts, the one who could identify the hidden tensions that threatened to tear civilizations apart, and either resolve them through honest confrontation or allow them to burn themselves out in controlled conflicts that prevented greater catastrophes. His understanding of the contradictions inherent in conscious existence made him invaluable in situations where the other horsemen's more direct approaches might cause more harm than healing. It was during this period of hard-won stability that Lucifer, the fallen angel whose beauty was matched only by his ambition, began to weave the web of conspiracy that would lead to humanity's first great test. The Prince of Hell had watched the rise and fall of the Nephilim with keen interest, recognizing in their tragedy both a warning and an opportunity. If beings as powerful as the hybrid children of angels and demons could be brought low by their own hubris, then perhaps the key to ultimate victory lay not in direct confrontation with the cosmic order, but in corrupting it from within. Lucifer's plan was elegant in its complexity and terrible in its implications. Rather than challenging the Council's authority directly, he would work to demonstrate the fundamental hypocrisy of the cosmic balance they claimed to defend. Humanity, that species which the Council had designated as the ultimate arbiters of universal equilibrium, would become the instrument of its own downfall, and the proof that the entire system was built upon false foundations. The fallen angel's first step was to forge an alliance with Lilith, the mother of the Nephilim, whose grief over the destruction of her children had transformed her from a force of creative chaos into an embodiment of vengeful fury. Lilith's pain had curdled into hatred for the Council, the Horsemen, and most especially for humanity, which she saw as an inferior species that had been granted the recognition and protection that her own superior children had been denied. Their partnership was born not of love but of shared hatred, a mutual recognition that their individual desires for revenge against the cosmic order could only be achieved through cooperation. Lucifer brought to the alliance his vast knowledge of cosmic politics and his ability to manipulate events across multiple realms simultaneously. Lilith contributed her intimate understanding of the hybrid forces that had created the Nephilim, and her burning desire to see humanity suffer as she had suffered. Together, they conceived the Animus, an artifact of such dark purpose that its very creation violated several fundamental laws of cosmic existence. The Animus was designed to be a corruption engine, a device that would take the essential nature of conscious beings and twist it toward darkness while making that corruption seem like enlightenment. Unlike crude methods of mind control or possession, the Animus would work by amplifying the negative emotions that already existed within its targets, feeding on their fears, jealousies, and ambitions until these dark impulses overwhelmed their capacity for reason and compassion. The creation of such a device required power of a magnitude that neither Lucifer nor Lilith possessed individually. The Animus would need to be fueled by the life force of beings whose spiritual energy was both vast and concentrated, creatures whose very existence represented significant power within the cosmic order. After much consideration, they identified their targets: the demon lords of hell, those ancient and mighty beings who ruled over vast domains within the chaotic realm. But here they faced a seemingly insurmountable problem. The demon lords were far too powerful and suspicious to be approached directly, and even if they could be convinced to cooperate, their deaths would immediately alert the Charred Council to the conspiracy. What was needed was a way to eliminate these beings while making their destruction appear to serve the cause of cosmic balance rather than threaten it. The solution to this dilemma came through Samael, a demon lord whose cunning was matched only by his ambition and whose understanding of cosmic politics made him invaluable as a co-conspirator. Samael had long chafed under Lucifer's rule, viewing himself as equally worthy of leadership within Hell's hierarchy. He saw in the conspiracy an opportunity to advance his own position while serving what he believed to be a greater purpose. Samael's role in the plan was to create the circumstances that would justify the horseman's intervention against his fellow demon lords. Through careful manipulation and strategic provocations, he would make it appear that these beings were planning some great threat to the cosmic balance that required immediate action from the Council's enforcers. The horsemen would arrive to neutralize the threat, eliminating the demon lords in the name of preserving order while unknowingly providing the power needed to complete the animus. The first phase of this elaborate deception began when reports reached the Charred Council of unusual activity among the demon lords of Hell. Whispers spoke of secret meetings, strange alliances, and preparations for some great undertaking that violated the established treaties between heaven and hell. The information was fragmentary and contradictory, as such intelligence often was, but the pattern it suggested was troubling enough to warrant investigation. War and strife were selected for this mission, their complementary skills making them ideally suited for the delicate task of gathering intelligence while being prepared for immediate action, if the situation required it. War's reputation for absolute honesty would ensure that any evidence they gathered would be believed without question, while Strife's ability to navigate complex political situations would allow them to uncover the truth without triggering the very conflict they were trying to prevent. Their investigation led them through the labyrinthine politics of Hell, where truth and deception intertwined like lovers in an eternal dance. They encountered demon lords who seemed genuinely surprised by accusations of conspiracy, others who appeared nervous and evasive when questioned, and still others who openly boasted of their involvement in schemes that sounded too grandiose to be credible. Each piece of evidence they gathered seemed to support the existence of some great plot, while simultaneously raising more questions about its true nature and purpose. Samael played his role to perfection, presenting himself as a loyal servant of the cosmic balance who had discovered the conspiracy and sought to aid the horsemen in exposing it. His information was always accurate enough to be verified, but never complete enough to provide a full picture of what was actually occurring. He led war and strife through a carefully choreographed investigation that would inevitably conclude with the necessity of eliminating his rival demon lords, while leaving him in a position to claim their territories and power. The first demon lord to fall was Baal, whose domain encompassed vast armies of lesser demons that could theoretically pose a threat to the cosmic balance if properly organized and directed. The evidence against him was circumstantial but compelling. Unusual troop movements, the stockpiling of weapons and supplies, communications with other demon lords that could be interpreted as coordination for some greater purpose. When confronted by the horsemen, Baal's denials rang hollow against the weight of accumulated evidence, and his destruction was swift and absolute. The second target was Mammon, whose control over Hell's economy gave him the resources necessary to fund any large-scale operation against the established order. Again, the evidence was carefully crafted to suggest guilt while avoiding any details that might expose the true nature of the conspiracy. Mammon's protests of innocence were dismissed as the expected lies of a creature whose very nature was built upon deception, and his elimination followed the same pattern as his predecessors. One by one, the demon lords fell to the horseman's righteous fury, each death providing more power for the animus, while simultaneously removing potential obstacles to Lucifer's greater plan. War and strife carried out their missions with the methodical thoroughness that had made them legendary, never suspecting that they were serving as instruments in a conspiracy that would ultimately threaten everything they had sworn to protect. The completion of the animus marked the beginning of humanity's first great test, though the young species remained unaware of the forces that were about to be unleashed upon them. Hidden in laboratories that existed between dimensions, Lucifer and Lilith put the finishing touches on their creation, a device that would corrupt humanity's essential nature while making that corruption appear to be enlightenment and growth. The artifact was beautiful in its terrible perfection, a crystalline structure that seemed to contain entire galaxies within its faceted surface. It pulsed with a dark energy that was simultaneously seductive and repulsive, promising power and knowledge to those who gazed upon it, while concealing the price that such gifts would demand. The animus had been designed to work slowly and subtly, spreading its influence through humanity, like a plague of the spirit that would transform the species from within. When the horsemen finally discovered the truth about their unwitting participation in the conspiracy, their reaction was swift and terrible. War's rage at being deceived burned like a sun going nova, his fury at having been made a tool in humanity's corruption driving him to levels of violence that impressed even his battle-hardened companions. Strife's response was more complex, a mixture of anger at the deception and admiration for the elegance of the trap that had been laid for them. The confrontation with Lucifer took place in a realm between realms, where the laws of physics bent to accommodate conflicts between beings whose power transcended normal understanding. The fallen angel met the horseman's accusations with a smile that contained both triumph and genuine affection, acknowledging their skill while revealing that their very competence had made them perfect tools for his purpose. But even as Lucifer revealed his victory, even as the animus began its work of corrupting humanity's essential nature, the seeds of his plan's ultimate failure were already being sown. The device that was meant to prove humanity's unworthiness would instead demonstrate their remarkable resilience, their ability to find light even in the deepest darkness, and to choose goodness even when evil seemed more attractive or profitable. The corruption spread through the early human settlements like wildfire, transforming peaceful communities into war zones where neighbor turned against neighbor in pursuit of power, wealth, or simple dominance over others. But even as the darkness claimed many, others rose to oppose it, finding within themselves reserves of strength and compassion that the animus could not touch. These individuals became beacons of hope in a world increasingly dominated by fear and hatred, proving that humanity's essential nature was stronger than any artificial corruption. The Charred Council, when they learned of the conspiracy and its effects upon humanity, faced a choice that would define their own character as surely as it tested humanity's worth. They could have simply purged the corrupted humans and started over with a clean slate, erasing the evidence of their enforcers' manipulation and maintaining the fiction of cosmic infallibility. Instead, they chose to allow humanity to face this test with minimal intervention, recognizing that true growth could only come through genuine struggle against meaningful opposition. The establishment of the Seven Seals followed as the Council's response to this first great crisis in human history. These artifacts of immense power would serve as both protection and test for the growing human species, preventing outside interference in their development, while establishing the conditions under which their ultimate destiny would be determined. The seals represented a covenant between the Council and humanity, a promise that they would be allowed to develop according to their own nature, while being protected from forces beyond their ability to comprehend or resist. Millennia passed in relative tranquility as humanity grew and flourished under the protection of the Seven Seals, their civilizations rising and falling in the natural cycles that marked the passage of mortal time. The young species faced countless challenges and overcame most of them through ingenuity, cooperation, and an indomitable spirit that impressed even the most cynical observers of cosmic politics. Wars were fought and peace was made. Empires rose to greatness and crumbled to dust. But through it all, humanity demonstrated the resilience and adaptability that had convinced the Charred Council of their potential to serve as ultimate arbiters of universal balance. In the silver spires of heaven, where crystalline towers reach toward infinity, and the light of pure order illuminated halls of impossible beauty, the Archangel Abaddon watched humanity's progress with growing unease. As commander of the Hellguard, heaven's most elite military force, Abaddon had dedicated his existence to the preservation of divine order and the protection of all that was good and just in creation. His service record was without blemish, his loyalty beyond question, his tactical brilliance recognized throughout the celestial hierarchy. But as the centuries passed and humanity continued to develop, Abaddon began to perceive what he believed to be a fatal flaw in the cosmic design. The seven seals that protected humanity also prevented heaven from taking direct action to guide their development, leaving the young species vulnerable to the subtle influences that hell could exert through dreams, temptations, and the gradual corruption of human institutions. While heaven was constrained by honor and law to respect the terms of the cosmic covenant, hell faced no such restrictions on their ability to poison humanity's growth from within. This perceived imbalance tormented Abaddon's sense of justice and fair play. He had witnessed countless civilizations fall to demonic corruption when they might have been saved through timely angelic intervention. He had watched good beings make evil choices because they lacked the wisdom to see through hell's deceptions, choices that might have been avoided if heaven had been permitted to offer guidance and support. The very protection that was meant to ensure humanity's free development seemed to be ensuring their eventual damnation. The Archangel's concerns found a sympathetic ear in Azrael, the angel of death, whose unique position gave him insights into the ultimate consequences of the cosmic balance that others lacked. Unlike his fellow angels, who dealt primarily with the forces of creation and preservation, Azrael witnessed the endings of all things, the final moments when the true worth of lives and civilizations was revealed. His perspective was necessarily long-term, focused not on immediate victories or defeats, but on ultimate outcomes and final judgments. Azrael shared Abaddon's fears about humanity's vulnerability to demonic influence, but his concerns went deeper than mere tactical considerations. The angel of death could see the patterns that governed existence, the way small corruptions grew over time into great evils, the manner in which societies that began with noble intentions could be gradually twisted into instruments of oppression and suffering. He perceived in humanity's current trajectory the seeds of future catastrophes that would make the Nephilim's conquest seem gentle by comparison. Their collaboration began with careful discussions about the nature of the cosmic balance and the theoretical possibility of taking preemptive action to ensure humanity's proper development. These conversations were conducted in the deepest chambers of heaven's archives, where the accumulated wisdom of angels was stored in crystalline matrices that preserved not just information but the very thoughts and emotions of their creators. Here, surrounded by the testimony of countless ages, the two angels began to construct the philosophical framework that would justify their eventual actions. The core of their argument was elegantly simple and terrifyingly logical. The seven seals were meant to ensure that humanity would develop according to their own nature, free from outside interference. But if hell was already interfering through subtle corruption and gradual influence, then heaven's adherence to the letter of the covenant was actually violating its spirit. True protection of humanity required active intervention to counter the demonic influences that were slowly but inevitably turning the young species away from their intended destiny as arbiters of cosmic balance. Their plan began with careful intelligence gathering, using heaven's vast network of observers and agents. to document the extent of demonic influence in human affairs. What they discovered exceeded even their worst fears. Hell's corruption was not limited to individual humans or isolated communities, but had spread throughout human civilization like a cancer, manifesting in the form of unjust laws, corrupt institutions, and social systems that rewarded vice while punishing virtue. The evidence they compiled painted a picture of a species in terminal decline, their noble potential being systematically destroyed by forces they could neither perceive nor resist. Human governments were riddled with officials who had sold their souls for power and wealth. Religious institutions that should have provided moral guidance had become tools for controlling and exploiting the faithful. Even the most basic human relationships were being poisoned by the demonic emphasis on competition, dominance, and the pursuit of selfish gain at any cost. Armed with this disturbing intelligence, Abaddon and Azrael approached the highest levels of heaven's hierarchy with a proposal that was both desperate and reasonable. They requested permission to take preemptive action against Hell's growing influence on humanity, to break 6 of the 7 seals and trigger the end war before demonic corruption could reach the point where humanity would be incapable of choosing righteousness even when given the opportunity. The response from heaven's leadership was swift and unequivocal. Such action was forbidden by the cosmic covenant and would represent a violation of the fundamental principles upon which the entire universal order was based. The 7 seals could only be broken when humanity was truly ready for the final test, not when angels decided that readiness should be imposed upon them. To act otherwise would be to repeat the error of the Nephilim, substituting their judgment for the natural development of a species that had been granted the right of self-determination. This rejection drove Abaddon and Azrael to consider more radical alternatives. If heaven's official position prevented them from saving humanity through legitimate channels, then they would have to find unofficial means to achieve their righteous goal. The plan that emerged from their desperate deliberations was audacious in scope and terrible in its implications. But they convinced themselves that the magnitude of the threat justified extreme measures. Working in absolute secrecy, they began to seek out allies among heaven's military forces, beings whose loyalty to the cause of righteousness exceeded their adherence to official policy. The Hellguard provided a natural recruiting ground for such individuals. Warriors who had witnessed firsthand the effects of demonic corruption and who understood the necessity of decisive action against evil. Gradually, carefully, they built a conspiracy within heaven itself, a shadow organization dedicated to saving humanity from the corruption that official policy seemed willing to tolerate. Their most crucial ally was Ulthane, a maker whose skills in forging and crafting made him invaluable for the technical aspects of their plan. The 7 seals were not merely symbolic artifacts, but complex devices that channeled and controlled vast cosmic forces. Breaking them would require intimate knowledge of their construction and the ability to manipulate energies that operated at the fundamental level of reality itself. Ulthane possessed both the knowledge and the skill necessary to achieve what they desired, but convincing him to participate required careful persuasion. The Maker's initial response to their proposal was one of horror and disbelief. He understood better than anyone the catastrophic consequences that would follow from the premature breaking of the seals, the way such action would shatter the delicate balance that held the cosmos together. But as Abaddon and Azrael presented their evidence of humanity's corruption and the growing threat that demonic influence posed to the entire universal order, Ulthane began to see the terrible logic of their position. The plan they developed together was elegantly complex, designed to break 6 of the 7 seals while making it appear that the action was justified by immediate necessity rather than premeditative conspiracy. They would create a crisis that would force the Charred Council to authorize the breaking of the seals as an emergency measure, allowing them to achieve their goal while avoiding direct responsibility for violating the Cosmic Covenant. The instrument of this deception would be the Destroyer, a being of such power and malevolence that its very existence would justify any action taken to prevent its victory. But the Destroyer was not some external threat that they would have to locate and manipulate. Instead, it would be created from one of their own number, a volunteer who would accept transformation into the very evil they sought to defeat in order to provide the crisis that would trigger their salvation of humanity. The choice of who would make this ultimate sacrifice was perhaps the most agonizing decision that any of the conspirators faced. Whoever accepted this role would be transformed beyond recognition, their noble nature corrupted into something monstrous and evil, their memories and personality twisted to serve their new function as the ultimate enemy of all that was good and right. It would be a form of death that was worse than simple annihilation. For the volunteer would continue to exist, but would no longer be themselves in any meaningful sense. In the end, it was Abaddon who stepped forward to accept this terrible burden, driven by his sense of responsibility as the military leader who had conceived the plan and his unwavering conviction that someone had to pay the price for humanity's salvation. His transformation from noble archangel to demonic destroyer would be the cornerstone of their conspiracy, the linchpin that would hold their complex deception together long enough to achieve their ultimate goal. But even the most carefully planned conspiracy could not account for all variables, and the intervention of the Charred Council's enforcers introduced complications that the angels had not anticipated. War, youngest of the four horsemen, arrived on Earth just as the premature Endwar was beginning, summoned by the breaking of what he believed to be the final seal. His confusion at finding only 6 seals broken, his bewilderment at the situation he encountered, created the perfect opportunity for the conspiracy to collapse in the most catastrophic way possible. The battle between War and the Destroyer played out across Earth's surface with a fury that shook the foundations of reality itself. These were beings whose power transcended normal understanding, entities capable of reshaping continents with their conflicts and altering the very laws of physics through the force of their will. Their combat was not merely a physical contest, but a collision between opposing cosmic principles, order and chaos made manifest in forms that mortal minds could barely comprehend. War fought with the righteous fury of one who believed himself to be defending the innocent against ultimate evil, his great sword channeling not merely his own power, but the fundamental force of cosmic justice itself. Every blow he struck carried the weight of universal law. Every movement expressed the principle that evil must not be allowed to triumph over good, regardless of the cost in blood and suffering. The Destroyer met his attacks with the terrible strength of one who had sacrificed everything for what he believed to be a greater good, his draconic form channeling the accumulated power of millennia spent in service to heaven's cause. But the transformation had done its work too well, corrupting not just his appearance but his essential nature, turning his noble motivations into something dark and twisted that sought dominance rather than justice. Their battle raged across continents and through dimensions, leaving scars in reality itself that would never fully heal. Mountains were leveled, seas were boiled away, entire landscapes were transformed into alien geometries that defied comprehension. The few humans who survived the initial stages of their conflict bore witness to displays of power that challenged every assumption about the nature of existence itself. But War was not merely fighting the Destroyer. He was also battling against his own confusion and growing suspicion that something was fundamentally wrong with the situation he had been thrust into. The horseman's deep connection to the cosmic balance made him sensitive to disturbances in the universal order, and he could sense that the end war he was participating in was somehow artificial, manufactured, rather than naturally arising from humanity's readiness for final judgment. This distraction proved fatal to his chances of victory. In the crucial moment when he might have struck the killing blow against his opponent, War hesitated, torn between his duty to end the threat and his growing certainty that he was being manipulated by forces whose agenda remained hidden from him. That moment of uncertainty was all the destroyer needed to turn the tide of battle, overwhelming War's defenses and striking him down with a blow that would have killed any lesser being. War's defeat marked the beginning of a century-long imprisonment that would reshape both his understanding of cosmic politics and his relationship with the other horsemen. Brought before the Charred Council in chains, accused of triggering the End War prematurely and violating the fundamental laws that governed his existence, War faced judgment from the very beings who had granted him his power and authority. The Council's verdict was swift and terrible in its implications. War would be stripped of most of his power and bound by the oversight of a Watcher, an agent whose task was to ensure that the horseman's actions served the cause of cosmic balance rather than personal ambition. Only by proving his innocence through investigation and action could War hope to regain his former status and reunite with his fellow horsemen. But the Council's judgment concealed a deeper truth that would only become apparent through the long years of War's exile. The ancient arbiters had known from the beginning about Abaddon and Azrael's conspiracy, had allowed it to unfold because they recognized in it an opportunity to test both humanity's resilience and the horsemen's dedication to their duty. War's imprisonment was not punishment, but preparation, a crucible in which his character would be refined and his understanding deepened. During his century of captivity, War was forced to confront the possibility that everything he had believed about cosmic justice and divine authority might be based upon false foundations. The conspiracy that had led to his downfall had been perpetrated by beings whose motives were unquestionably noble, whose dedication to righteousness exceeded even his own. If such individuals could be driven to violate the fundamental laws of existence, what did that say about the system that had pushed them to such extremes? The transformation of Earth during War's absence provided a stark demonstration of the consequences that followed when cosmic balance was disrupted. Humanity, caught in the crossfire between forces they could neither comprehend nor resist, had been virtually exterminated, their civilizations reduced to ruins, and their survivors scattered to the far corners of a world that no longer resembled the garden planet they had once called home. The destroyer, freed from the constraints that War's opposition had placed upon him, had established his dominion over the transformed Earth, ruling from a throne built upon the bones of those who had dared to resist his authority. His victory was complete but hollow, for in saving humanity from demonic corruption, he had instead delivered them to destruction at his own hands. The noble sacrifice that Abaddon had made had achieved its intended goal while simultaneously destroying everything it was meant to preserve. Yet even in this apparent triumph of darkness over light, even as the destroyer surveyed his kingdom of ruins and proclaimed his satisfaction with the outcome, the seeds of ultimate redemption were being planted. War's imprisonment had not broken his spirit, but had instead forged it into something harder and purer than it had ever been before. When the time came for him to return to Earth and face the consequences of the premature End War, he would carry with him not just the power to restore balance, but the wisdom to understand what balance truly meant. In the vast emptiness between realms, where the cold light of distant stars provided the only illumination for travelers brave enough to venture beyond the boundaries of known existence, Death rode his pale steed Despair through dimensions that had no names and followed paths that existed only in the spaces between thoughts. The second of the four horsemen had not waited for the Charred Council's permission to act upon the knowledge of his brother's imprisonment, for Death understood better than any other being that some debts could only be paid through personal sacrifice. The news of war's disgrace had reached Death through channels that transcended normal communication, carried on currents of cosmic force that connected all things in ways that most conscious beings never suspected. The moment he learned of his brother's fate, Death felt something that he had not experienced since the terrible day when they had first raised their weapons against their own people. The crushing weight of responsibility for another's suffering combined with the burning need to make amends, regardless of the personal cost. Death's plan was characteristically direct in its ultimate goal while being labyrinthine in its execution. If War had been imprisoned because of his alleged role in triggering the premature Endwar, then the solution was to undo the consequences of that action by restoring what had been lost. Humanity had been virtually destroyed in the conflict between War and the Destroyer, their civilizations reduced to ruins and their populations scattered to the far corners of a transformed world. If Death could find a way to resurrect the entire human species, then War's supposed crime would be negated, and his innocence would be proven beyond question. The theoretical foundation for such an undertaking existed in the deepest archives of cosmic knowledge, in texts so ancient that they predated the current universal order, and spoke of powers that had been deliberately forgotten for the safety of all existence. Resurrection on the scale that Death contemplated had never been attempted by any being, for the energy required would be vast, beyond comprehension, and the risks involved would threaten the stability of reality itself. But Death was not merely any being, and the magnitude of the task did not deter him from pursuing what he saw as the only path to justice for his brother. He was the horseman of Death, the embodiment of endings and transitions, the one being in all of creation who understood the fundamental relationship between destruction and renewal. If anyone could find a way to reverse the ultimate ending and bring entire species back from the void, it would be he. His journey began in the Icy Vale, a realm of perpetual winter where the boundaries between life and death were thinner than elsewhere, and where ancient powers slumbered in tombs of crystallized time. Here, Death sought the Crowfather, an entity whose knowledge of cosmic secrets was matched only by his reluctance to share that knowledge with others. The Crowfather existed in multiple states simultaneously, both alive and dead, both wise and mad, both helpful and dangerous, depending upon how one approached him and what one sought to learn. The confrontation between Death and the Crowfather was as much a philosophical debate as a physical contest, a battle of wills that ranged across questions of justice, sacrifice, and the proper limits of power. The Crowfather tested Death's resolve through illusions and challenges that forced the horseman to confront the deepest truths about his own nature and motivations. In the end, the ancient being provided the information Death sought, but only after extracting a price that would echo through all the events that followed. The key to humanity's resurrection lay not in any single artifact or location, but in a complex undertaking that would require Death to gather power from multiple sources while simultaneously proving his worthiness through trials that would test every aspect of his character. The Well of Souls, that primordial fountain from which all consciousness originally sprang, held the potential to restore what had been lost, but accessing its power would require preparation that might take centuries to complete. Death's first destination was the Forge Lands, a realm where the Makers dwelt among their great works of creation and construction. These ancient beings had served as craftsmen to both heaven and hell, forging weapons and artifacts that shaped the course of cosmic history. But the Makers had also suffered their own losses during the great conflicts that marked the transition between cosmic ages, and their realm bore the scars of battles fought against forces that sought to corrupt their creative purpose. The Makers welcomed death with the cautious respect due to one whose power was legendary but whose intentions were unclear. Their leader, Alia, recognized in the Horseman's quest an opportunity to restore balance to forces that had been thrown into chaos by the premature Endwar. But she also understood that the path Death had chosen would require him to confront challenges that would test not just his power, but his wisdom and compassion. The corruption that had infected the Forge Lands was unlike anything Death had previously encountered. A spiritual poison that transformed everything it touched into twisted parodies of their original forms. This was not the simple evil of demonic influence, or the harsh justice of angelic wrath, but something far more insidious, the corruption of noble purpose, the perversion of creative energy into destructive force. Fighting the corruption required Death to master abilities he had never needed before, to learn the delicate balance between destruction and preservation that would allow him to eliminate the poison without destroying what it had infected. Each victory against the corrupted beings brought him closer to understanding the true nature of his quest, the way that resurrection required not just the power to restore life, but the wisdom to understand what forms of life were worth restoring. The guardian that Death awakened in the Maker's foundries was a being of immense power, whose corruption had transformed it from a protector into a threat that endangered everything the Makers had built. The battle against this titan was as much a lesson in humility as a test of strength, demonstrating to Death that even the mightiest beings could be brought low by spiritual poison, and that victory sometimes required the courage to destroy what one sought to protect. His journey to the kingdom of the dead opened Death's understanding to perspectives he had never considered, realms where the conventional distinctions between life and death held no meaning, and where power flowed according to rules that transcended normal comprehension. Here, Death encountered beings who had found forms of existence that lay beyond the traditional cycles of birth and mortality, entities who had achieved a kind of immortality through acceptance of their essential nature rather than resistance to change. The Lord of Bones, who ruled this shadowy realm, challenged Death's assumptions about the nature of his quest, forcing the Horseman to confront the possibility that resurrection might not be the blessing he believed it to be. The dead who dwelt in this kingdom had found peace in their ending, liberation from the struggles and suffering that marked mortal existence. To drag them back to life might be an act of cruelty rather than compassion, a violation of the natural order that would create more suffering than it prevented. But Death's commitment to his brother's redemption proved stronger than his philosophical doubts, and he pressed forward through trials that tested every aspect of his character. The Dead Lords who served the kingdom's ruler each embodied different aspects of the relationship between ending and meaning, challenging Death to prove that his quest served purposes greater than mere personal loyalty. The revelation that Absalom, the first of the Nephilim and Death's former brother, had survived their great purge and become the source of the corruption that plagued multiple realms, struck Death with the force of cosmic revelation. Here was the truth that lay behind all the suffering and chaos that had followed the premature Endwar. Their past had returned to haunt not just them, but all of existence, and the only way to achieve true redemption was to face that past with complete honesty about its meaning and consequences. The battle against Absalom was simultaneously the most personal and most cosmic conflict that Death had ever engaged in. This was not merely a fight between two powerful beings, but a confrontation with the guilt and regret that had shaped Death's existence since the day he first raised his hand against his own people. Absalom embodied all of death's doubts about the righteousness of their cause and the justice of their sacrifice, manifesting as a living accusation that demanded answers to questions death had spent millennia avoiding. Victory over Absalom brought death no satisfaction, only the hollow understanding that some wounds could never truly heal, and that redemption sometimes required accepting the permanent consequences of necessary actions. But it also cleared the path to the Well of Souls, that primordial fountain whose power might yet restore what had been lost, and prove that the sacrifices of the past had not been made in vain. The trials that awaited death in the angelic realm of lost light tested his understanding of the complex relationship between justice and mercy, between the demands of cosmic law and the needs of individual souls. Here he encountered angels who had been driven to desperate measures by their desire to protect what they held dear, beings whose noble intentions had led them down paths that threatened everything they claimed to serve. The corruption of the Archon Lucien demonstrated to death that even the most righteous beings could fall victim to spiritual poison when they allowed fear and desperation to override their commitment to truth and justice. The angel's transformation from protector to destroyer served as a mirror that reflected death's own potential for corruption, showing him what he might become if he allowed his quest for his brother's redemption to override his commitment to the greater good. Fighting through the ivory citadel required death to master the most subtle aspects of his power, using his dominion over endings not to destroy but to facilitate the transitions necessary for healing and renewal. Each puzzle he solved, each challenge he overcame, taught him more about the delicate balance required to achieve resurrection without violating the fundamental laws that governed existence. The final confrontation with the guardian of the Well of Souls forced death to make the ultimate choice between personal desire and cosmic necessity. Standing at the threshold of the power he had sought for so long, he was forced to confront the true cost of his quest, and the question of whether his brother's redemption was worth the price that resurrection would demand. The sacrifice that death made at the Well of Souls was not merely the surrender of his own existence, but the acceptance of a transformation that would forever change his relationship with the cosmic forces he had served for so long. In choosing to give his essence to restore humanity, death proved that his understanding of balance extended beyond mere adherence to rules, to encompass the deeper wisdom of knowing when rules must be transcended for the sake of something greater. The resurrection of humanity that followed was not a simple restoration of what had been lost, but a renewal that took into account everything that had been learned through the trials and suffering that had preceded it. The humans who returned to life carried within them the accumulated wisdom of their species' journey through death and rebirth, making them stronger and wiser than they had ever been before. Death's sacrifice created ripples that spread throughout the cosmic order, demonstrating to all who witnessed it that true power lay not in the ability to dominate or control, but in the willingness to give oneself completely in service of something greater than personal ambition. His example would inspire others to similar acts of selfless heroism, creating a cascade of redemption that would ultimately transform the very nature of the conflict between order and chaos. But even as death's essence merged with the Well of Souls to restore what had been lost, even as humanity returned to life with renewed understanding of their place in the cosmic order, the consequences of the premature Endwa continued to unfold in ways that no one could have predicted. The resurrection of humanity was only the beginning of a series of events that would test every assumption about the nature of existence and force all the cosmic powers to reconsider their fundamental beliefs about justice, mercy, and the proper relationship between power and responsibility. While death pursued his desperate quest to resurrect humanity and war endured his century of imprisonment, the third of the four horsemen found herself facing a trial of an entirely different nature. Fury, whose tempestuous spirit had always burned with the fire of righteous indignation, and whose passion for justice exceeded even that of her brothers, was summoned before the Charred Council to receive a mission that would test not her power, but the very foundations of her character and understanding. The Council's chamber, vast beyond mortal comprehension and filled with the accumulated weight of cosmic authority, seemed to press down upon even Fury's indomitable spirit as the ancient arbiters delivered their pronouncement. The 7 deadly sins, those primordial embodiments of corruption that had been imprisoned since the earliest days of creation, had somehow escaped their eternal bonds and now roamed free throughout the universe, spreading their influence wherever conscious beings gathered to build civilizations. The escape of the sins represented a crisis that threatened to undo everything the cosmic balance had achieved since the end of the Great War between heaven and hell. These were not mere demons or fallen angels, whose evil could be combated through conventional means, but rather fundamental aspects of consciousness itself turned toward destructive purposes. They were the shadow of every virtue, the corruption of every noble impulse, the darkness that lurked in the heart of every thinking being. Envy had been the first to break free, her jealous nature having found a way to corrode the very bonds that held her captive. Her escape had weakened the prison that contained her siblings, allowing them to follow her into a universe that had grown complacent in their absence. Pride stalked through the halls of power, corrupting leaders and turning their noble ambitions into megalomania. Wrath spread conflict wherever he went, transforming just causes into bloody vendettas. Sloth whispered to the weary that surrender was preferable to struggle, while greed convinced the desperate that any price was acceptable if it brought them what they desired. Lust had found fertile ground in the hearts of those who confused passion with love, turning the most sacred bonds between conscious beings into instruments of manipulation and betrayal. Gluttony consumed not just food and drink, but hope itself, leaving behind empty souls that could find satisfaction in nothing. Together, the 7 represented a corruption so complete and fundamental that their very presence began to warp the fabric of reality itself. The Council's assignment to Fury was simple in its statement, but terrifying in its implications. She was to hunt down each of the 7 deadly sins and return them to their eternal prison before their influence could spread beyond the point of containment. But the Council also made clear that this was to be more than a simple mission of capture and imprisonment. Fury would be tested through her encounters with the sins, forced to confront aspects of her own nature that she had never fully acknowledged or understood. The Watcher, assigned to monitor Fury's mission, was unlike any that had served the other horsemen, for this entity possessed a wisdom and patience that seemed almost angelic in nature. Where previous Watchers had been stern taskmasters focused on ensuring compliance with the Council's directives, this one seemed genuinely concerned with Fury's spiritual development and understanding of her role in the cosmic order. Fury's first target was Wrath, whose influence had transformed entire regions of Earth into battlegrounds where former allies turned their weapons against each other in conflicts that served no purpose beyond the satisfaction of rage itself. The horsemen found the sin in the ruins of a great city, surrounded by the corpses of those who had died fighting for causes they could no longer remember, their faces still twisted with the fury that had consumed their final moments. The battle against Wrath was as much an internal struggle as an external conflict, for Fury recognized in her opponent the very essence of her own nature taken to its logical extreme. She had always been the most passionate of the horsemen, the one whose emotions burned brightest, and whose commitment to justice sometimes bordered on obsession. In Wrath's distorted features, she saw what she might become if she ever allowed her righteous anger to override her commitment to balance and truth. Victory came not through overpowering wrath with greater fury, but through achieving the kind of controlled passion that could channel anger into constructive rather than destructive purposes. Fury learned to fight not from rage but from love, not from hatred of evil, but from devotion to good. The lesson was painful and transformative, forcing her to confront the difference between righteous indignation and mere self-indulgence. The encounter with avarice tested Fury's understanding of desire and need, challenging her assumptions about what it meant to want something and what price one should be willing to pay to obtain it. The sin had established himself in a realm where every object was precious and every acquisition came at the cost of some essential part of the seeker's soul. Here, Fury was forced to choose between the power that would make her mission easier and the integrity that defined her essential nature. The temptation was subtle and sophisticated, appealing not to base greed but to noble ambitions that could be achieved through morally questionable means. Avarice offered Fury shortcuts to victory, weapons that would make her invincible, knowledge that would solve all mysteries, power that would allow her to protect everyone she cared about. The price for these gifts seemed small at first, merely the surrender of outdated notions about honor and fair play that had no place in a universe where evil fought without restraint. But Fury's rejection of these offers came not from rigid adherence to abstract principles, but from hard-won understanding of the relationship between means and ends. She had learned through painful experience that victories achieved through corruption were not truly victories at all, that power gained through betrayal of one's essential nature was ultimately self-defeating. The strength to resist avarice's temptations came from clarity about her own values and commitment to remaining true to them regardless of the immediate consequences. Her confrontation with pride proved to be the most challenging of all her encounters with the sins, for pride's corruption was so subtle and so appealing that it was difficult to recognize as corruption at all. This sin had taken refuge in the highest towers of mortal achievement, whispering to the greatest heroes, scholars, and leaders that they were exceptional beings who deserved recognition and authority commensurate with their superior abilities. Pride's arguments were logical and compelling, backed by evidence that seemed to demonstrate Fury's unique qualifications for leadership among the horsemen, and her brother's failure to appreciate her contributions to their shared mission. The sin painted a picture of a universe that would be better served if Fury took her rightful place as the leader of the cosmic forces of order, using her superior wisdom and passion to guide lesser beings toward their proper destiny. The seduction was so gradual and so reasonable that Fury almost failed to recognize it as corruption at all. Pride had taken her legitimate accomplishments and used them as the foundation for illegitimate ambitions, transforming healthy self-confidence into destructive narcissism. The realization that she had been manipulated filled Fury with a rage that threatened to consume her, but she had learned enough through her previous encounters to channel that anger into determination rather than destructive fury. The battles against sloth, gluttony, and lust each tested different aspects of Fury's character, while teaching her new truths about the nature of corruption and the proper response to evil. Sloth challenged her to remain committed to difficult tasks even when progress seemed impossible, while gluttony taught her the difference between satisfaction and satiation. Lust forced her to confront the relationship between genuine love and mere desire, showing her how even the most noble emotions could be perverted into instruments of manipulation and control. Each victory brought Fury closer to understanding the true nature of her mission and the deeper purpose behind the Council's assignment. The 7 deadly sins were not separate entities that had somehow escaped their prison, but rather aspects of consciousness itself that existed within every thinking being. The prison that had contained them was not some external dungeon, but the moral constraints that prevented conscious beings from surrendering completely to their worst impulses. The escape of the sins represented not a failure of cosmic security, but a necessary test of the moral development of all conscious species. They could only be truly defeated when beings learned to recognize and resist the corrupting influences within their own hearts, when they chose virtue not because they were compelled to do so, but because they understood the relationship between moral character and genuine happiness. The revelation that her watcher was actually envy in disguise came as the final and most profound test of everything Fury had learned through her encounters with the other sins. The being who had guided her through her trials, who had offered wisdom and support during her moments of greatest doubt, was revealed to be the very corruption she had been sent to combat. Every piece of advice, every moment of apparent compassion, every gesture of understanding had been carefully calculated to serve envy's ultimate purpose. But the discovery of this deception did not fill Fury with the rage and sense of betrayal that envy had expected. Instead, it brought a moment of perfect clarity about the nature of wisdom and the proper response to evil. Fury understood that even corruption could serve positive purposes when it was recognized for what it was and resisted with full knowledge of its nature. Envy's guidance had been poisoned from the beginning, but Fury's responses to that guidance had been shaped by her own growing understanding of virtue and balance. The final battle against envy was fought not with weapons but with truth, not with power but with compassion. Fury recognized in her opponent the same longing for recognition and acceptance that had driven her own struggles with pride and ambition. But where Fury had learned to find satisfaction in service to something greater than herself, envy remained trapped in the prison of comparison and resentment. Victory came through demonstrating to envy that the very qualities the sin envied in others were available to her as well, that the corruption that defined her nature was a choice rather than an inevitable destiny. Fury's triumph was not the destruction of her opponent, but her transformation. The conversion of destructive envy into constructive emulation that sought to achieve excellence rather than tear down the achievements of others. The completion of Fury's mission marked not just the recapture of the 7 deadly sins, but the transformation of the horseman herself, from a warrior driven by passion into a guardian guided by wisdom. She had learned that true strength came not from the ability to destroy what was wrong, but from the understanding necessary to nurture what was right. Her experiences had taught her that the greatest battles were fought not against external enemies, but against the corrupting influences that existed within every conscious heart. The return to Haven, that sanctuary, where the remnants of humanity had gathered under the protection of the Makers, provided Fury with her first opportunity to apply the wisdom she had gained through her trials. Here she encountered humans who embodied both the potential for greatness and the vulnerability to corruption that defined conscious existence throughout the universe. Their struggles with fear, doubt, and moral confusion reflected her own journey toward understanding and growth. Fury's role as protector of humanity was not simply a matter of using her power to shield them from external threats, but of helping them develop the internal strength necessary to resist the corrupting influences that would always be present in conscious existence. She became not just their guardian but their teacher, showing them through example that virtue was not weakness, but the highest form of strength, that moral courage was more important than physical power. The transformation of Fury from the most tempestuous of the horsemen into their most wise and compassionate member demonstrated the profound truth that the Council had been trying to teach through all their trials and assignments. True power came not from the ability to impose one's will upon others, but from the wisdom to understand when such imposition was necessary, and when it was merely an expression of pride or ambition disguised as righteousness. The cosmic forces that had been set in motion by war's imprisonment, death's sacrifice, and Fury's transformation began to converge in ways that none of the individual participants could have foreseen. The universe itself seemed to hold its breath as ancient prophecies approached their fulfillment, and the true purpose behind centuries of apparent chaos finally began to reveal itself, in chambers beyond the reach of time and space. The Charred Council observed the unfolding patterns with the patience of beings who had witnessed the birth and death of entire cosmic orders. War's release from his century of bondage came not through external intervention, but through his own growing understanding of the forces that had manipulated his fate. The Watcher that had been assigned to monitor his actions proved to be both chain and key, a constant reminder of his fallen status that simultaneously provided him with the insights necessary to understand the true nature of the conspiracy that had led to his disgrace. Through careful investigation and increasingly desperate battles against forces that seemed determined to prevent his success, War gradually uncovered the threads that connected Abaddon's noble sacrifice to Azrael's misguided wisdom to the Charred Council's apparent indifference to justice. The revelation that the Council had known about the conspiracy from its beginning, that they had allowed the premature Endwar to unfold because they recognized in it an opportunity for growth and understanding that could not be achieved through peaceful means, struck War with the force of cosmic enlightenment. Every moment of suffering, every instance of apparent injustice, every seemingly random catastrophe had been part of a vast design intended to prepare all the participants for challenges that lay beyond their current understanding. But this knowledge brought with it a burden of responsibility that was almost too great to bear. If the Council's wisdom was so vast that they could perceive meaning and purpose in events that appeared completely destructive to lesser beings, then what did that say about the nature of free will and moral choice? Were all conscious beings merely puppets dancing to scripts written by incomprehensibly superior intelligence, or did their choices and struggles still retain some essential meaning, despite being encompassed within larger patterns? The answer came through War's final confrontation with the Soul of Cinder, that amalgamation of all the Lords of Cinder who had previously sacrificed themselves to maintain the First Flame's artificial existence. This battle was not merely a contest of strength between two powerful beings, but a philosophical debate made manifest through violence, a collision between different understandings of what it meant to preserve order and protect the innocent. The Soul of Cinder embodied the principle of endless sacrifice, the idea that some goods were so precious that any price was acceptable to preserve them. It had absorbed the essence of countless heroes who had chosen to burn themselves as fuel for the cosmic order, and it fought with the accumulated determination of all those noble souls. But War recognized in his opponent the same flaw that had driven Abaddon to his transformation and Azrael to his conspiracy: the belief that good ends could justify any means, that preservation of the current order was more important than the growth and development that came from allowing that order to evolve naturally. Victory over the Soul of Cinder required War to demonstrate a deeper understanding of balance than any he had previously achieved. He had to prove that preservation and change could work together, that order and chaos could serve each other's purposes, that the universe could be protected without being imprisoned in artificial stasis. The triumph was not achieved through superior force, but through superior wisdom, the ability to show his opponent that their shared goals could be better served through cooperation than through conflict. Death's return from the Well of Souls came not as a resurrection in the conventional sense, but as a transformation that embodied the fundamental principle he had always served. He had become something beyond the traditional categories of life and death, a being who existed at the intersection of ending and beginning, capable of facilitating transitions that would have been impossible for any entity bound to a single state of existence. His sacrifice had not destroyed him, but had purified him, removing the limitations that had prevented him from fully understanding his role in the cosmic order. The reunion of the four horsemen took place in the space between spaces, where the boundaries that normally separated different realms became permeable, and beings of sufficient power could exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions. Here, war, death, fury, and strife came together for the first time since their transformation from Nephilim into servants of the cosmic balance, each bringing the wisdom and understanding they had gained through their individual trials. Strife's arrival completed the quaternary that had been broken for so long, but his appearance raised questions that none of his siblings had anticipated, where death had been transformed by sacrifice, war by understanding, and fury by compassion. Strife seemed to have achieved his growth through embracing contradictions rather than resolving them. He had learned to find harmony not by eliminating conflict, but by understanding the creative potential that lay within properly directed opposition. The conversation that followed their reunion was unlike any exchange that had taken place since the founding of the current cosmic order. For the first time in their existence as horsemen, the four spoke not as servants carrying out the directives of superior powers, but as equals sharing insights into the nature of existence itself. They had all seen behind the veil that concealed the deeper patterns governing reality, and what they had discovered challenged every assumption about the relationship between power and responsibility. War spoke of his realization that true justice required not just the punishment of wrongdoing, but the understanding of what drove beings to evil in the first place. His battles against corruption had taught him that most evil was not born from inherent malice, but from good intentions, twisted by fear, desperation, or incomplete understanding. Justice, he had learned, was not about imposing perfect order, but about creating conditions where beings could choose good over evil, with full knowledge of both options. Death shared his discovery that endings were not failures but opportunities, that every conclusion contained within it the seeds of new beginnings. His journey through realms where life and death lost their conventional meanings had shown him that the universe was not a machine that could break down, but a living entity that grew and developed through constant transformation. Preservation of the status quo was not just impossible, but undesirable, for it prevented the growth that gave existence its meaning and purpose. Fury revealed the profound truth she had learned through her encounters with the 7 deadly sins, that corruption and virtue were not external forces battling for control of the universe, but internal choices that every conscious being made moment by moment throughout their existence. The greatest battles were not fought on cosmic battlefields, but within the hearts and minds of individuals who chose between selfishness and service, between fear and love, between despair and hope. Strife brought to their council the understanding that opposition and cooperation were not incompatible, but rather complementary aspects of a larger harmony that encompassed all possibilities. He had learned that conflicts could be creative rather than destructive when they were motivated by genuine desire for truth and understanding rather than mere desire for victory. The universe needed both advocates and critics, both builders and questioners, both stability and change working together toward ends that none could achieve alone. Together, the 4 horsemen began to perceive the outline of the true cosmic design that their individual experiences had prepared them to understand. The Charred Council's apparent manipulations, the seemingly random catastrophes that had shaped their existence, the trials and sufferings that had tested their character and resolve, all revealed themselves as parts of a vast educational process intended to prepare them for responsibilities that transcended their original role as enforcers of cosmic law. The universe was approaching a transition point where the old categories and boundaries would no longer be sufficient to contain the forces that conscious evolution had released. The rigid separation between heaven and hell, between order and chaos, between good and evil, was breaking down as beings throughout the cosmos developed the wisdom necessary to navigate more complex moral landscapes. What was needed was not enforcement of the old rules, but guidance in developing new forms of understanding that could encompass greater complexity without losing essential truths. The revelation came to them simultaneously, a moment of cosmic enlightenment that illuminated the true purpose behind everything they had experienced. They were not meant to be the eternal servants of a cosmic order that would never change, but rather the architects of a new form of existence that would transcend the limitations of all previous systems. Their trials had not been punishments or tests of loyalty, but preparation for the responsibility of shepherding conscious beings through the transition to forms of existence that had never before been attempted. The cosmic balance they had served for so long was not a static equilibrium between opposing forces, but a dynamic harmony that could encompass any degree of complexity or contradiction. Their role was not to impose this balance from outside, but to help conscious beings discover it within themselves, to become living embodiments of the principles that would guide the universe through its next phase of development. This understanding brought with it both exhilaration and terror, for it meant accepting responsibility not just for maintaining existing order, but for creating new forms of existence that had never been tested. They would become pioneers in the truest sense, explorers of possibilities that existed beyond the boundaries of current knowledge or understanding. Every choice they made would shape the future of consciousness itself, determining what forms of existence would be possible for generations beyond counting. The final confrontation was not with any external enemy, but with their own limitations and fears, their reluctance to abandon the familiar structures that had given their existence meaning and purpose. To accept their new role would mean letting go of everything they had been in order to become something unprecedented, surrendering the security of servitude for the uncertainty of leadership. But the choice, when it came, was not difficult at all. Each of the four horsemen had already demonstrated through their individual journeys that they valued growth over security, understanding over certainty, service over power. They had learned that true strength came not from the ability to control, but from the wisdom to guide, not from the power to compel, but from the capacity to inspire. The transformation that followed was unlike anything that had occurred since the first moments of creation. The four horsemen became something beyond their previous nature, while retaining everything essential about their character and purpose. They remained themselves while becoming more than themselves, individual beings who had achieved perfect unity without losing their distinctive qualities. The new cosmic order that emerged from their transformation was not a replacement for what had come before, but an evolution that incorporated the best of all previous systems while transcending their limitations. Heaven and hell continued to exist as aspects of the greater harmony, but their opposition was transformed from destructive conflict into creative tension. Order and chaos worked together to facilitate growth and development, rather than battling for dominance over static territories. Humanity, the species whose potential had been the catalyst for so much cosmic upheaval, finally achieved the role that had always been intended for them. They became not the subjects of divine authority, but partners in the cosmic dance, beings whose growth and development contributed to the well-being of all existence. Their weakness became strength as they learned to find solutions through cooperation rather than domination. Their mortality became wisdom as they learned to value the time they had rather than yearning for impossible eternities. And so our journey through the endless cycles of war and peace draws to its gentle close, like the final notes of an ancient song that has played since time's beginning. We have walked alongside the four horsemen through their darkest hours and greatest triumphs, witnessed the price of power and the redemption found in sacrifice. From the primordial void where creation first stirred to the transformed cosmos where all possibilities converge in harmony, we have traced the long arc of consciousness learning to understand its own infinite potential. The balance they fought to preserve was never about maintaining the status quo, but about ensuring that all creation had the freedom to choose its own path. War learned that true justice comes not from the sword but from the wisdom to know when the sword must be set aside. Death discovered that endings are doorways rather than walls, transitions that lead to forms of existence more beautiful than what came before. Fury transformed her tempestuous nature into compassionate strength that could nurture growth rather than simply destroying obstacles. Strife found harmony within contradiction, teaching others that conflict and cooperation could serve the same ultimate purposes. The cosmic order they helped birth encompasses all previous truths while transcending their limitations. Heaven and hell continue their eternal dance, but their steps now follow rhythms of creative tension rather than destructive opposition. The Charred Council evolved from distant arbiters into wise teachers, guiding rather than commanding the development of conscious beings throughout the universe. Humanity claimed their destined role not as rulers or subjects, but as living bridges between all forms of existence, their unique nature allowing them to understand and communicate with every expression of consciousness. The seven seals that once protected humanity from premature contact with cosmic forces became symbols of the gradual awakening that all conscious beings experience as they grow from simple awareness to full understanding of their place in the greater harmony. The trials that once seemed like punishments revealed themselves as gifts, opportunities for growth that could not have been achieved through easier paths. The sacrifices that appeared to demand everything gave back infinitely more than they cost, proving that true power lies not in taking but in giving. The Nephilim's tragic legacy found redemption through their transformed descendants. The horsemen whose journey from destroyers to protectors demonstrated that even the greatest mistakes could be transformed into opportunities for wisdom and growth. Their story reminds us that heroism is not about being perfect, but about choosing to grow from our imperfections. Not about avoiding all suffering, but about finding meaning within the struggles we cannot escape. As you drift toward peaceful rest, carry with you the knowledge that even in the darkest times, hope endures through those willing to sacrifice everything for others. The horseman's vigil continues, but now as guardians of freedom rather than enforcers of law, protectors of growth rather than preservers of stasis. Their transformed nature allows them to serve not just as warriors against darkness, but as lights that illuminate the path toward greater understanding and deeper love. In the space between sleeping and waking, their legend becomes part of the dreams that shape tomorrow's reality. The endless cycles of creation and destruction continue, but now they spiral upward toward ever greater beauty and complexity, rather than merely repeating the same patterns of rise and fall. Each ending contains new beginnings. Each sacrifice opens doors to undreamed possibilities. Each choice to love, rather than fear, adds another thread to the tapestry of existence. The balance they learn to serve teaches us that true harmony comes not from the elimination of all opposition, but from the integration of all perspectives into symphonies of meaning that encompass every voice while drowning out none. In their story, we find the promise that no struggle is meaningless, no sacrifice is wasted, no darkness so deep that it cannot be transformed into light. Through the patient application of wisdom, compassion, and hope, rest now in the understanding that their vigil continues, that the guardians of balance watch over all creation with eyes that have learned to see beauty in struggle, meaning in chaos, and love in the heart of every conscious being. The eternal dance of existence goes on, But now all who join it do so as partners in the great work of transforming the universe into something worthy of the infinite potential that dwells within every soul that dreams of something better than what has come before.